put out a survey a while back. We were just kind of talking about, wonder what how the Chinkapins are doing from the members that we're sending out and stuff. Just trying to get a little feedback, and we was hoping to send out. I sent out 400 surveys to members. We was hoping to get 10% back, which would have been 40 responses. They blowed us away. It was 154 responses we got back, which 38%. It was just outstanding. We asked them 8 questions. The first question was, how many seeds furnished by Ozark Chinkapin Foundation did you plant? Had 152 responses to that. They was right around 95% if you add up all the little pieces of pie there that the seeds did get planted. So that was a pretty good number, I felt. The second question that we asked was did the seeds germinate? Adding up all the little pieces of pie, that about 94% said that theirs did germinate. So that was a good number, I thought. Then we asked them how many trees are still alive. The best adding up all these little pieces of pie, it was 80% of the surveyors said they have at least one tree still alive, which was a really high number, I thought. So I was really proud of that. Then we asked them, did you use a tree shelter? I didn't think a whole lot of people would, but actually, 75.7% said they did not use. So you're looking at almost 75% of the people did use some form of tree shelter, whether it be homemade or a store manufactured one. And then we asked, wondering what month did you plant the seeds? March, April, and May. That was majority of the months that was planted. How many times you water the plants? 150 responses to that was 41% said that they only used the rain. So that was a pretty high number of plants that was not getting any additional water besides just rainfall. Then we asked them how many of the provided trees started pollinating or producing nuts. Of those, we had 95.4% said none, but we did have seven responses said they had seen nuts on the trees that we had provided them. Then the final final question we had on our survey was the growing instructions that we provided helpful? About 94% said yes overall. So I think the instructions are helpful. A lot of people had asked, maybe to clarify a few things, and that's kind of how we ended up with the next deal of answering the questions. I took all the comments that we had off those 154 surveys that had been taken, and I compiled their comments, questions that they had, and I'm hopefully the way I envision this to work, maybe I will ask their question that they had, and maybe I might be able to get Steve or Chris or Terrence, AJ, any of those people could jump right in and maybe answer these questions and help these people out. Maybe they'll be able to solve whatever their problem is that they're having. The first one, site selection. Jack Herring a while ago, he gave a pretty good explanation of this and stuff he touched on it on the subject quite a bit. So but it was aspects, you know, how much sun do they require, best soil type for the Ozark Chinkapin, soil types to avoid and drainage. Does anybody want to jump in there and ask and answer those questions that the members had?
I'll do the one for let's see, soil types to avoid. They don't grow good in clay, and you need to have and Chris, you know, the slides that he had actually helped answer some of these. That was a really good presentation Chris did. But you need to avoid clay. Clay will, even a layer of it 30 inches down, 40 inches down, will cause the tree to bonsai. It'll grow. So it's about, you know, 4 to 6 feet tall. And then the limbs, the branches will lay real limp. And you don't know why. They're kind of like they're almost rubbery. And it's because you hit the roots actually, or that taproot hit a hard pan of clay. And, you know, it could be, you know, several feet down, but avoid soil that does have clay. If it's not well drained, like Chris said it really good, he said you could probably pour out, I think he said maybe around 5 gallons of water. If you can pour that out and it disappears, that's the right kind of soil that you actually need. You need well drained soil, and you can get everything else right. If you don't have that one, they will fail. Now the RPM trees, different story, but for planting seed out in locations like we've been talking about, you must have well-drained soil. And Chris brought up a good one too. I'll go back and see if I can look at my notes here. He was talking about, you know, the soil man. You can go back to, I guess that was NRC, I think that's what that was. You can go back to your
NRCS.
Yeah, NRCS for each county, and they've got maps like Chris was showing here, and you can get one for your area. That'd be a good place to start. And you know, talking last night, we were talking to Kelly, and he brought up a good point. He said that where that one heritage visitor center is at down there, we want to plant some trees at. They had cow pasture all around them, and because that went from a forest, and by the way, Fred Paye said there's Chinkapins growing all around on the edge of the woods. And you'd think, well, they'll grow right there, but you got to be careful though, because if you have equipment driving on that wet soil to compact it, or if you have cattle on wet soil, they will actually just walking, you know, decades of it on that soil when it's soaking wet and everything, depending on the soil type, but they can actually make it not as permeable to water draining off. And so it could actually hurt it. So you may want to break up that pan that you have. So in the Ozarks on top of the hill, sometimes you'll have what's called a fragipan. And the way you'll know it's there, if you have like a tree blow down and, you know, exposing that hole where the roots were at, and if it rains and you see like a little pond of water that stays there, there's a fragipan there, or else clay that's keeping that from draining. And so don't plant your trees there, but you may be able to go just downhill, literally a few yards away, you know, 20 to 40 yards, and you may get down below that fragipan. And in farmland, they call it a hard pan. Same thing happens when you drive tractors over farmland and it's wet. You get a hard pan that will do the same thing, keeps it from allowing moisture to drain off, water to drain off. But they do not like standing in water. They're like a cherry tree. They need well-drained soil. And the American chestnut is the same way too.
Okay.
Asking about associated species.
What about associated species that's growing with Chinkapin?
Anybody else want to answer that one?
Can you repeat the question?
What other trees or species do you see that's growing around by the Chinkapin trees?
Dad, do you want to take?
You
Yeah.
do that, Leslie.
Okay, so pine, maple, and then like spice bush, blueberry. I would say the most common that I see would be pine, and like some sort of blueberry, huckleberry.
And to add to that, Chris could probably tell you, I think blackjack oak or some others that we were talking about is another one.
Sassafras as well, correct?
Yeah, I've seen them around sassafras. I've actually,
Sassafras is everywhere. I guess a lot of those other species are too, but yeah, definitely sassafras too, for sure.
kind of interesting when we were talking to Jack Herring from Mississippi. He said that on the, if I remember correctly, he said the north and east aspect in Mississippi on that those hilly places he found there was where he was seeing them at. And but now I have seen them grow before on north aspects or north slopes, right in with I've got pictures of this too, right in with pawpaw trees.
You know, I was, the soil type, you know, they're wanting like a rocky soil type or something like that. But what I thought was interesting was Terrence had sent some information on after he entered the survey, and it was sandy, loomy ground, and that was real interesting there. So
one thing you want to avoid is humus. I've planted them before in places where you got a lot of humus, and they just don't do well. I know Fred Paye, if I remember correctly from what he'd said years ago, a lot of the remnant populations he was finding were on areas kind of like windswept where you didn't have much leaf litter at all, and they don't like humus. I've tried that before, and kind of like what Fred was saying too, they do better where they don't have that. It'll literally make the roots rot. That's why you have to tumble them. You have them in that peat moss in the winter. Think of it like a person laying in a bed on the same side. You know, you need to aerate that, and you know they need loose, airy soil to grow in, and so that, you know, and I've seen them before. Talking about soil types to avoid, I've seen them grow in sand before, down in southern Arkansas, down where Regine's at. I've seen them grow along, of all things, along creek bottoms where you have a raised sandy terrace. But again, it's well-drained soil. That is the number one thing you're looking for. And if you don't have well-drained soil, they're not gonna make it.
is there any, you know, do they get too much sun? Is there, or do they?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Is there a possibility of them getting too much sun?
Yes, there is. And that's a good point. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The more sun they get, you know, the more sunlight you have on those branches, the more production of pollen and female flowers you're going to have. And so sun is good. And I think before we were talking last night, 6 to 8 hours is about right, about like what you need for tomato plant. And if you have too much and you've got especially dry year, then you run the risk of them being burned up and cooked in that. And I don't care how much water you give them, if it's really hot and really dry and they're being baked and you have rocks all around you. And that brings up another point too. You know, when y'all made your plot down there, I told Chris to be sure and leave a few trees here and there, you know, smaller ones. And you can clear those away once they get established. But kind of like in nature, you know, if you have a storm come through or if a real large tree dies, opens up that canopy, then those Chinkapins have been hanging on, it will shoot up through that. And so it's kind of like the sun is good, but too much is not good. So the sweet spot is probably, you know, 6 to 8 hours, I'd say. You know, you can get by with less than that, but you won't have as much growth. You'll have significantly more growth if you get about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And that one picture that Chris White had of the topo map, you know, the contour intervals on that southern edge of the hill, that is the most efficient place where you can cut down trees and get the biggest bang for your buck. If you tried to clear, and I think, was that 0.37 acres he said that y'all had down there?
Yes.
Okay, so that same 3.7 acres, if you can look at it like this, if you had a well-drained place that was up on top of that hill, but it was flat woods, let's say, you know, kind of like a flat place on top of the hill where you had trees at, you'd be in the sun a big part of the day, you know, because of the shade. But because of where y'all put that at, you know, y'all put a lot of thought into that. So the way that hill faces south, that south aspect, you're tracking the sun most of the day. And so it's just a more efficient way of doing it. And Steve Churchill and Al Knox can tell you over on their area over there. I know Al went out and had to water them. And Al, do you care to tell a little bit about what happened on that? Y'all actually cleaned up all the understory and it increased the evaporation. And if you're here, can you or Steve tell a little bit about what happened? If we still have Al or Steve here.
Well, I'm here, but let's look. How about if Mr. Al answers that one?
Sounds good.
Come on, Mr. Al.
Hello, hello. You got me now?
We got you.
Yes, we can hear you, Al.
We hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, what can I say? One thing I can say about our 12,000 acre park is 6,000 are south and southwest facing ridges. The Nature Conservancy surveyed a few years ago. And so I think that's the beginning. Start with the best sites are the south, southwest, like you said. But the problem is deciding where to put these small sites and the shape of it so that you'll have the correct amount of sun. And I don't have a whole lot of data on that. I have more questions than answers. I'd like to meet with whoever has some experience or who has some authority over the parks, state parks, that people concerned need to get together. And I can furnish a lot of questions about size and shape. And I've got a lot more questions than answers. But I say the way, I don't know what to do, but I think the process is get knowledgeable, responsible authorities together and let's answer these questions and go from there and make our plan for the park project.
Well, one thing we were wondering if you could tell us, Al, we're talking right now about, you know, the best types of soil, best places to plant them and the aspect. And you care to share with us what happened over at Hobbs? You know, we were talking about sunlight, about 6 to 8 hours and soil type, but you guys went in and cleaned up all the blackberry vines and all the brush, and it looked really, really pretty. And so when you removed all that ground cover, and it was a real hot summer that particular year, can you tell how the trees reacted to that extra loss of moisture from that loss of ground cover?
Well, I think the assumption is that it might have gotten too dry, but I don't have a lot of data on that. We had I think a 70% success rate on keeping them alive. And I know there was one tree that went out the 4-foot tube that first year, but I don't know if I've got the answer you're looking for. Steve can jump in there.
You know what we did We picked the south facing slope, full sun, well drained. It was a great area, and it had a lot of scrub growth on there. So we didn't have to take off any large trees. So we got with our friends at Forestry, and they came in with a dozer, and they got rid of all the scrub growth. But what they did, sure, they cleaned up the area. So for a while, it really got dry. But having that dozer go over the soil, it just worked up all the seed bank that had been accumulating there for years. And boy, it didn't take long for passion flowers and all sorts of other goodies to start growing back. So we didn't have bare ground a long time, but that's certainly something you need to watch. That if you're going to plant these trees, make sure that you leave 2-3 feet around the grow tube if you can, if it's going to grow weeds, to help them not get too hot or too dry.
Good point. Good point. I know as far as the sun goes, I was telling them it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You need to have sun, but if you remove too much, or if you have too much sun, you've got a really dry year with not much rain. Unless you can get water to those trees, you may wind up losing them. And the reason I say that, we had a plot on an area that had well-drained soil. It's a terrace, and we had probably 50 or 60 trees growing there, and they were doing really good. And so we went in and we cut a lot of the brush and opened it up really good for them. And we ran out of time to finish. And I had one Chinkapin that was up in briars. And then we had temperatures over 100 degrees for several days, and in the 90s for several weeks, and no rain. And so the end result is, it's a real remote place. We couldn't get water in there for. And so all the ones we opened up the canopy even better for, and cleared away all the understory, the blackberries and all. What that did, it actually allowed the soil to dry up faster. It allowed that moisture to evaporate. Then the one tree that I was hoping we'd get to, we didn't finish up in the blackberries. Those blackberry vines, they drop that temperature of the ground, just like you're saying, and they helped hold the moisture. That tree survived, and I lost probably 20 because of that were, trees that we'd put a lot of work into to get established. And it was just, too much drought and too much sun. And yet the ones right at the very edge of the plot, we stopped cutting everything away, all that brush. They're the ones that did good. So I guess the lesson learned is it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Until they get really established, you may want to not go extreme either way. Not too much shade, but then if you do have a lot of sun, having ground cover, and like the restoration pot that y'all put in that Chris had the good pictures of, and we talked, and we knew that it would be losing a lot of moisture because there's no leaf litter there. So that's when all of y'all put down the straw to drop that temperature down, and it will hold down the moisture a little bit better. If that answers the question on that.
That answers the question on that, and I think we've covered the site selection pretty well.
Okay.
The straw, that's brought me to the next category on the watering that they had. The major question was, how often do I water? How much water do I give each time? And should some type of mulch be used to hold moisture during drought times?
Al, you want to tackle that one, or Steve?
Well, Mr. Al, I'm going to let Mr. Al go.
Well, I don't. We trusted your 2 weeks without water as a general rule, and kind of followed that.
Now, Steve, whether we did it correctly or not, we put about a half a gallon of water on, poured it slowly down the inside of each tube. Now, we made sure that when we put these grow tubes over the seed, that we made sure that grow tube was about 1 inch into the ground. So when we had to go back and water, the water wasn't going to just go down to the bottom of the tube and run out. It was going to accumulate so it could perk over the root. I think that's important for people to know.
Very good.
Yeah, it took a little time to let it soak in before you added more.
Yeah, and what you're trying to water is taproot. And if I can share this screen right here, I'm going to see if I can make this work.
So while you're trying to pull that up, we had a couple folks ask questions too, and I think you were getting ready to talk about the mulch. Someone asked, are there any recommendations for the installation of mulch around Chinkapins? I know earlier when Chris did his presentation, he showed that they put straw around the tubes.
Yes, and we talked about this before. And like with me, if I have extreme heat around a tree where they're literally being cooked by rock or a large amount of limestone that's kind of turned darker, I will usually rake up some leaf litter around them. And that's okay for temporary. You don't need to leave it permanently though. And so the straw is airy and it's a lot more permeable to rainwater falling than straw would be. So straw was a good matchup and it worked really good. So what it did, it actually, just like a garden in hot weather, you know, I don't care how much you water your garden. If it's extremely hot, they're going to cook. So putting straw around, if you have extreme heat, it will drop that temperature down, you know, probably 10 or 12 degrees or if not more. And so it takes a lot of stress off of those trees where they're not literally cooking. And then it also is real permeable to any water you pour down. And so
Like that Chris just made, what he's talking here was that light colored straw will reflect that heat a lot better than just the leaf litter probably.
Yeah, since with it being a lighter color, it won't absorb that heat.
Right.
chairs. So, but anyhow, what it is, it's a picture of a Chinkapin that I pulled up, and I had two of them growing side by side. I planted two, and they were real good genetics. And I think if I remember correctly, I planted those sometime in April. And so this is the very end of April. So you can see a real long, it's almost like a kite string, about a 34-inch or more longer root. So just like we're talking about before, that taproot is survival mechanism. And so when you water them, it's real important that, like Al was saying, pour the water in slowly so it will soak down in. I've even experimented with little tubes off to the side that I've buried and put some rock in them so no rodents would try to crawl in them, and pour water. So if you can ideally get moisture down towards the bottom half of that taproot, you're going to help it do what it's wanting to do, which is establish that taproot as a survival mechanism. And we don't know for sure how long that taproot will grow. I'm still this day don't know, but we think though, because we didn't have American chestnuts here, and we did have Ozark Chinkapins, they probably are more adapted to drought and some of these places that we have, you know, and where you'll have sandy soil. So that taproot is the survival mechanism. And just like Kim was saying before, Kim Young was saying, it may be not that important later on, but to get it through these droughts, that taproot is essential because it'll get down where that moisture is at. And so you have to keep that mindset. And I've planted Chinese chestnuts. I've planted grass before, or not grass, but grass as well too. And they just will not make it where we have the Ozark Chinkapins growing at. They can't handle that hotter, drier weather without moisture. And that taproot is survival mechanism for them. And if you think like prairie plants, and you can take plants that grow on the Great Plains, you know, you'll have fire there. Buffalo or elk will maybe graze them down right to the ground. They still come back up. Real harsh environment. So something like a compass plant, it will put down that taproot. Sounds hard to believe, 14 or 16 feet down. And so that is the survival mechanism that tree is trying to get down there. So when Chris was saying, when they planted their trees, you know, he said he's still seeing them pop back up. And one thing we didn't talk much about, what's really going on here is not much on the top, what's going on the bottom. And it's kind of reminds me of a hickory a little bit. You know, you're not going to get much top growth, but what goes on below the ground is what's going to give it the energy, just like drawing a bow back, and then you're going to have a shoot up of that top of it. So that taproot getting down in there and getting established is important. And if you got clay, it will grow until it hits that. Or if you have some kind of rock formation that's not letting that taproot get down, that would affect. Say this much on the watering. I've kind of modified. When I first started doing this, we had some really wet years, and then we had 2011 and 2012. And so those years we had, for those of us like y'all in Arkansas forestry, and anybody else listening that that remembers those years, 2011, especially 2012, we had soil. We had fuel moisture loads. I'm talking like in logs and that sort of thing, that was less than what you were seeing at that same time out in the Rocky Mountains. So we had two things going on. You had a lack of rain and extremely high temperatures. You know, it was over 100 degrees. We had some days that were, I know it sounds hard to believe, 104 and 105 degrees. And so when you have that going on, you know, it's the risk of forest fire was really high. One of the few times I've ever seen us at higher risk, you know, than it was in those places you'd think like out in Idaho and Colorado and Montana. And so when you have conditions like that, I've modified our growing instructions. And I said something to the effect, if it doesn't rain within a week or so, then you need to go ahead and water them. So if it's raining and you're getting enough rain, you know, you should be okay. If you hadn't got any rain on a brand new planting, I would recommend, and this is going over my notes from years, and I see this a lot in May. Sometimes you'll have drought spells in May. I would recommend watering of them if you go more than like 4 to 5 or 6 days. And it's kind of one of those things, almost like gardening. If it's cloudy days and yet it hadn't rained, that takes some of the stress off of them. But for new young plants, or they're trying to get that taproot down, I would recommend, especially in soil like what y'all have, where you did that restoration planting, I'd recommend giving them, you know, maybe if you can get enough to them, give them maybe half a gallon of water every week if it doesn't rain. And so if you start to see a little bit of evidence on those leaves of a little bit of wilt, or if you got some trees growing on research plots, and I see the dogwoods, they're usually the first ones to show evidence. If you see dogwood leaves starting to shrivel a little bit, you better give your Chinkapins a little bit of water if you can get it to them. And so what I've done, and I don't have any pictures here of it, I started putting out tubs on plots where I drilled holes in the lid and it will catch the water. And so a lot of these places I have are real remote, and you got to hike into it and carry everything with you when you get in there. And so that's what I would recommend on the watering. So if it has not rained in about, 4 days to a week, and you think you need to, give them a drink of water then. But if you're getting rain pretty consistently, through April, through May, through June, you should be okay. And one thing I have noticed about watering, I'll say this and then I'll be done with it here. But one thing I've noticed, and I've got this in my notes, is that if you have a Chinkapin, and let's say it's extreme heat, extreme drought, and everything's starting to show, if you can give that tree like a gallon of water, if it's a real big tree, give it 2 or 3 gallons of water during those stressful times, it will outgrow all the other Chinkapins that you did not give water to. So these Chinkapin trees react really well with some TLC. So during stressful times, plenty of water at a time they need it the most will make a big difference.
Steve, what about watering during the dormant time or the winter?
Well, usually by then, we have less hours of sunlight and the sun's at a lot lower angle, and the soil moistures, in fact, your humidity will typically be a little bit higher then than it is, and soil moisture will be higher then. because you don't get as much drying through the winter as you would. But there could be, there's times, in fact, my son, a couple of years ago, he hung with me and we were still watering on some of our plots. It just was the oddest thing. We went from the end of May all the way through December, and I think we got less than 2/3 inch of rain. So we had to carry water up to them, and we were still watering trees in November in the first part of December. And every storm that came through that for some reason that year, and I was tracking every one of them, they were just on the edge of it. It'd be a little bit, to the south or a little bit to the north of them. But and that was an unusual thing. I haven't seen that in about 15 years. So good questions, though.
Well, we're gonna go to the next one, next group of questions that I know you've had a lot of dealings with this year, and that's protecting from insects and animals. One guy said, the leaves appeared to be eaten by bugs. What should I use to protect my trees?
Well, on the presentation I had, I showed it, and I had a picture here of a bottle of spray to use, and Chris showed it at Walmart. They sell a type of organic spray, and I can't bring it up. I've got it on my screen, but I can't bring it up. We can put it on the website, and maybe AJ, we can put it on Facebook for everyone if you want to take a look at it. And it's just like Chris said, you can spray this up till the day you harvest tomatoes, and it's organic. It's maybe a form of BT, but it kills over 100 leaf-eating insects and their eggs and different stages of larvae. And so the Asiatic oak weevil is the big one that will do this. And they're every place we planted Ozark Chinkapins, they're there. They're everywhere. The only exception to that, I think, may have been down where Tori is at. And I think you have so many pines there, Tori, maybe a reason why you didn't see much predation down there. I don't know.
The other part of that question is there any tips keeping the squirrels and other animals from digging up the nuts?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've got pictures of this. I can't bring it up. And so I'll try to send some of these to AJ, but what I do, I take a 1 foot square of what they call hardware cloth, and they make it like in an inch, then a ½ inch. If you can get that smaller size, that quarter, that's what you need. Because I've watched squirrels on trail cameras, actually, they can dig through that and get in there. But if you have that and then set a stone on it to keep it down, it also keeps armadillos from digging in there. And so what you're going to do is literally let the Chinkapin grow up through that screen. And then you're going to need to take you a pair of pliers, that cuts on the nose end, and clip that out of the way. And sometimes I can't get back to them in time. And I've got a few Chinkapin trees out there that are probably have the corners of some of that hardware cloth sticking out of them. But if you plant your Chinkapins in the fall of the year, like what generally happens in nature, you're going to have a real high mortality of them. They're going to dig them up and eat them. The squirrels are on the ground. They're looking for nuts. They can smell them, and they will go after them. And, but years ago, there used to be millions of them. So several of them would make it. And I had a picture on one plot where we had 6 of them that actually, when they fell, they do what I call a Chinkapin ricochet. They shot under a rock, and it was far enough in there, I guess the rodents couldn't get to it. So under one of our best trees, I've got 6 volunteers coming up. And so to get back to what they're saying, though, if you will have a grow tube, and just like what Chris was saying, how y'all pushed it just about a ½ inch down the ground, one of the benefits of a grow tube is not only protecting it from the deer, it's like a mini greenhouse. They will actually keep growing all the way into when there's snow on the ground. As long as that tree is not more than probably about 3 feet tall, they'll continue doing this. After that, then it'll pull the air in somehow and they turn. But I've got pictures of snow on the ground and then those trees still growing there. And part of the reason that's happening is because what Chris said, and y'all are about to see this. So when you push that grow tube just very slightly down the ground, it acts like a chimney for the smell of that nut. So it chimneys that scent up. And I've watched squirrels and chipmunks go right by a freshly planted Chinkapin, and they cannot smell it. But if you've got a wire cage around there, they can smell it. They'll go up on top of the cage and right down in there. If you've got the top closed, they will keep messing with it and trying to get it. And I've saw them dig on the corners, just trying to get in too. They'll eventually will get in there. And so, you know, if the day shift squirrels and chipmunks don't get it, then the night shift, you got pack rats. And these places where we've got these Chinkapins at, we have an abundance of rodents, you know, golden mice, deer mice, pack rats, chipmunks, squirrels. And that's just what you're going to have. I mean, it's a boon for wildlife. And I showed you all the picture of the two bobcats side by side. I'm seeing more animal activity on these plots now that they're making, you know, hundreds and hundreds of nuts and thousands of nuts than I've ever seen before. And then, you know, more turkeys, more deer. It's just incredible.
I had a question posted on the chat. Philip asked, is a solid grow tube or mesh protection better?
Excellent question. I've used them both. I used to think there's a little bit of advantage with the ones that had the perforations in them. I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag. I don't see any really definite difference in them. I know both of them tend to attract wasps. They want to go in there and build their nest in there, you'll find later on. So you have to knock those out of there. I can't really see. The only thing I would recommend is when you buy those, there will be a bundle of little white netting that comes with these grow tubes. And you can tie a knot in them. It's like a sock. You slip it over the top of the grow tube. And those are designed for areas like maybe in your yard where it's more of a habitat where you see bluebirds. For some reason, bluebirds get up on these tubes. I don't know if they're going in there after insects, but they will die in there. And actually, one guy planted one. He told me, he said, didn't know why the bluebirds kept going in his tubes. We put one of those little socks on it. And he actually had a total of 4 bluebirds in 2 days get down in there, and they couldn't get out. And so if they die in there, it will kill the tree too. His tree eventually died from by year 2 of bluebirds in there. I've never seen anything like that. And so I don't know if, like I said, they were going after insects. So those little tile things are good to you know, help keep from, you know, birds losing their lives down inside of it. But back to whether the solid or the perforated, I've had good luck with both of them. One thing I will say about grow tubes, I've done a lot of experimenting. When we had our memorandum agreement with the US Forestry, I told them, I said, I know these 2x tree shelters are really expensive, but I've tried all kinds. And the way I look at it, this is inexpensive protection for something very extremely rare. And so then one year she forgot to get those, and she bought some of those plastic ones for us. And I've tried the brown ones, I've tried the plastic ones, a little bit of everything, and hands down, the 2x tree shelter is the best one. And there's concern too while we're talking about this, whether you use the perforator or the solid. A lot of people think, well, they're real spindly, the trees. Once that tree grows out of that and it gets up past 4 or 5 feet, it gets enough movement from the wind that it begins to stiffen up. And those are biodegradable, and I do not recommend taking them off. I used to only take them off when the tree has grown so big it's outgrowing that tube. Split it thin, because if you don't, for some reason, and this is something that's what I've seen over the years, the same reason big buck deer like cedar trees and sassafras, they also like Chinkapins. And don't ask me why, but they do. So I've got trees that are pretty good size that I took tubes off of, and they began to, you know, rub their antlers and did a lot of damage on them. But we never got blind on them though. And so what I did then, I just spun that tube around. I left that rebar right there, and it will deter them. You've got it, you know, right with the tree with the tube on it. For some reason, they don't want to try to rub their antlers on it. Good question, though.
Good information. And you answered a question that had been asked on the chat about the birds. So I know AJ had answered responded back, and you just answered that question too. So
Yeah, they send those, and to keep the wasp out and try to keep the Asiatic oak weevil, I actually don't get the wrong impression here, but I actually bought women's knee-high socks. And it's kind of like a, kind of like a stocking, if you will. And I actually put some of those over them. I tried to put rubber bands on to hold them, and those cooked and disappeared real quick. But the ones that they stayed on, it seemed like on the solid grow tubes, it seemed to keep the wasp out and the Asiatic oak weevil. And I just experimented for 1 year or so with that to see what would happen. If you do put those on the top, be sure you remove them, because if you don't get back to those trees in time and they're trying to push out, and that's going to cause trouble. And it could be like Chris said, that lead branch may start pointing down, and you may have to try to correct that and point it back up again. So once they start getting up close, go ahead and pull those off, whether it's a bluebird protector, or if you're trying something like I said, to keep the wasp out and the Asiatic weevil. It's real important, by the way, to spray those trees when they're younger, about every week, whether you see any damage or not. If you wait till they're there, it's too late. So if you got a little Chinkapin, it's got 4 leaves on it, and the Asiatic oak weevils chew those off, it could set your tree back quite a few months, maybe even half a year, because they have to regrow them again, and they can be really, really bad. So if you want to give them a good head start when you plant them, go ahead and just for the time being spray them, and they keep doing their thing all the way through. But it seems like it's kind of like weeds. Seem like you get up later in the year, weeds and Asiatic weevils aren't quite the problem. But once they get up taller, once you get up 8 or 9, 10 feet tall, then the birds take care of the issue. Now looking at the time here again, and we're at 4:39, but I'll keep answering questions, and then how much more have we got? Go ahead.
I've got 3 more questions, and
okay.
The next one is fertilizer. We had a lot of people saying that my trees are very slow growth rate. Would a fertilizer help with growth?
Very good question. So the early years when I was trying to accelerate the growth, I was doing nut grafts and experimenting with all kinds of different things. And so I was wanting to try to get, I was needing to get actually nuts really quick, turnaround, like from a year-old created tree. And so I experimented, if I remember correctly, it was 0.57.0, I think that's right. It was real high phosphorus fertilizer. And I had good luck with the little small potted plants, but with a Chinkapin tree, you don't know which way that root's going. If you're on a hillside, and you're trying to fertilize it, you got a tap root and you got your other roots. I couldn't tell any difference in it. All the trees that we grow are unfertilized. And that stuff I've used on fruit trees. You know what you're doing, you can actually make some fruit trees bloom in the fall of the year. And I've done that before. And so, but it did not work on mature Chinkapins. I could tell no difference at all in them. And you got to be careful, because a lot of nut-bearing trees, whether you're talking about pecans or walnuts, they react really differently to fertilizer as some other plants would, especially when they're younger. So I would recommend no fertilizer. We plant these trees, they seed in the ground, and we don't do it in pots. If you're going to try to transplant a tree and you got a tap root about 38 inches long, it's just not very practical. It's real hard to do. So a seed planted in the ground when you're frost free and you have that tap root, out there, about 2 to 4 inches, 5 inches long. If you carefully plant it, it will outgrow any container Chinkapin there is. And Andy Newhouse was on our plots here years ago, maybe a couple, 3 years ago. And he was looking at those trees, very minimal care, almost no watering. And he said, if you took real good care of chestnuts and you fertilized them, babied them, and watered them, that growth might be equivalent to some of those trees we had on the research test plot. And I thought that was a pretty good testimony, because he's been on a lot of American chestnut plots. The fertilizer, trust me, with this one, you don't need it. But
All right.
that's my experience, okay?
All right, we'll move on to the next one. And this was just basically a couple people had some comment on here, and they said they had healthy sprouts and planted per instructions. They took off good, then started getting brown leaves, slowly died. What could be the causes of this? Could it be the blight? Could it be unusual wet spraying? I know
Yeah,
there's a lot of factors to that.
I've not seen the blight, and you know, the thing about Chinkapins, and Fred brought this up really good. A small Chinkapin is a small target. You know, you don't have a large area in comparison, you know, where you could get damage from like a sapsucker or you know, a buck you know, hitting it with his antlers. So you got a real tiny little target, and so I have not seen it yet. Now that's just me, and I've planted thousands of them and watched them grow, and I have not seen blight on any very tiny little Chinkapin. Now, from the work that Fred Paillet did, you know, he was talking about up in Northeast about a real small chestnut that was crowded out by a big sugar maple, and it looked like it hadn't grown for, you know, a decade or two. And so, but I don't think that was it. Going back to what he's talking about, which could be the reason, usually the number one reason why, what he says, they start off good, then the leaves get brown. You're going to have either poor drainage, or there could be something below the ground going on. It could be too much humus in the soil. It could be maybe something clipped the taproot. And I've actually dug into Chinkapins that have died to see what's going on. And so that taproot, and by the way, it's like a kite string, maybe between that and the diameter of a pencil lead. So, you know, that thing's growing down, it's extremely thin. So if you have an insect that burrows through there, or if you have a mole or anything that clips that root, that tree could still live, but it'll put out a shallow root system, then it'll die as soon as it gets dry, and you no longer have moisture in that upper layer where it puts out the roots, you know, horizontal root growth. And so it's going to be probably one of those things. And you know, there could be a lot of things happen to it, and it could be an unusually wet spring. And I've had old timers tell me that you can look at a hill and it was like a line. You could go 2/3 up that hill, and then the Chinkapins start growing, going from there up. And I used to think, why is it they won't grow all the way down the hill? Why could that be? Well, there's a place over near the Arkansas Missouri border where I was out, and there were Chinkapins growing all the way down the very bottom of the hill, you know, little bitty ones, you know, like maybe a foot or so tall. And I thought, well, that shoots that theory out. And I want you to know, in the next week or two, we had unusual amount of rain. It rained for about, you know, 3 or 4 days there, where we got, I don't know how much rain it was, but everything was soaked. And I went back to that same location a few weeks after that, and every tree up that hillside that was growing, the little, you know, foot tall Chinkapins, that all turned yellow and then brown, and they were dying. And Larry Burford down in Arkansas told me that he had some Chinkapins in pots, you know, I'd given him seed for, and he had them sitting on a picnic table, and it rained for, if I remember correctly, I don't know if he's on here, it's about 3 days, and those things turned yellow and died within a week. And it's because they could not get all that water drained off. You know, those little pots were actually holding that water in, and it just drowned it. So, you know, going back to the tree, to give you an example, I've got one place, in fact, one of the photos I had on my presentation of that tree that was a little bit less than 8-inch DBH, probably about 20 feet from it, something like that. Let's tell you better, 25. I showed her a real healthy tree I replanted, but the story behind that is it was the third replant on that tree. They grew just like what they're describing here, real healthy, growing, followed the instructions, and then the leaves turned brown, then it slowly died. And so by the time I got ready to replant it 3 times, I thought, I wonder what's going on. Then I learned how to use the rebar to find out what's below you. So I took that rebar and started hammering in the ground deeper than where I'd done before, where I planted that tree at. And then you could feel the ground under me vibrate. And there was like a gigantic bowl, if you will, rock there. It was actually being a barrier to that root going down. It was only below the soil, maybe, I don't know, a foot and a half, something like that. So I moved over, drove the rebar down again, still hitting it, moved over a little bit further. I'm talking only about, 3 or 4 feet over. Then the rebar hammered all the way down, just loose, rocky, cherry ground, pulled it back up. And that tree now is, let's can tell you, 12 or 15 feet tall. And so a lot of times you can move over just a little bit, get away from that problem, but I don't know what kind of soil they actually have it in. So hopefully that helps explain it.
Thank you. That's, the rebar, that's a pretty good technique to use on that, but to find out what's below the ground.
And there's so much stuff in the growing instructions. One thing that I was wanting to do, and I'll show this on a video, you can literally take the rebar when you're hammering it down to make sure you're not having any kind of obstruction. If you got a clay pan, it'll almost grab a hold of that thing, you pull it out and you'll see clay on there. And so it's a real good tool. But let's say if you got loose, rocky soil, a lot of gravel, a lot of sand, chert like what y'all have, you can, or let's say if you got a place that's less than desirable, you can pull that rebar out and you can actually take sandy soil or, and you can actually try to dump it in that hole. It's not going to go in there. So you can take your real long piece of baling wire, I'm talking like about, 24 inches long, and work it down that hole and spin it. And just like when they're pouring concrete and they're, putting that tool in there so the concrete will settle, no air bubbles or whatever, and it will work all that sand in there. So then you plant your Chinkapin in there. So you've got a pilot hole that goes down, like 24 inches or so. Because when you hammer that rebar down, you may have broken rock in two and made some real sharp places. It gives you a little pilot hole and it gives them a chance to take off really good. And that's a little, probably 400 series or 4,000. Instead of 101, it's like 401. A little extra work, but they respond really well to those kind of things if you have the time to do them.
Appreciate that. That's kind of on the planting deal that I've got next. Some planting techniques to avoid becoming J root and U root. I would see where the sand would help that tremendously. And then
let's see. So when to plant? If you do it in the fall of the year, not until about New Year's Day, will you start seeing success, a real high percentage of success. So the highest percentage success that I have is when you're frost free. They take off a lot quicker then. Planting them in January, February, March, you still have to take a lot of care to make sure that those plantings aren't dug up and eaten, by putting wire covers over them. You can take your seed and have a lot higher success when you're frost free, whenever that is. And usually around here, that's around tax time, around April 16th, somewhere in there. It varies depending on where you're at. Planting techniques to avoid the J or the U. And are they talking about the root itself? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you're going to have that some of the times when you have your seed in peat moss. If you have it overcrowded or if you move them a lot to a different position, you may run into this. Best thing I can tell you is if you'll scoot your seed, your 5 or 12, whatever you may have, if you'll scoot them on the end of the bag and point them, literally point the tips of them on towards that open end of that bag where you have the peat moss, they will shoot out like bayonets. But if you constantly have them twisted and wound over the other nuts, you'll get the J's or the U's. And whichever way that root is pointed is the way it's going to grow. So if you have it pointed at an angle where it's not down, it'll go that way. Fortunately, with the Chinkapins, those roots are real turgid. You can, they're real easy to break. But if you take a little bit of care when you're planting them and you dig out your hole a little bit, or you can actually lay this down, and I'll show this on our video that I wasn't able to film, but you can actually lay it in there and take that curb in or that U, and real slowly you can cover it with a little bit of sandy, well-drained soil and begin to wrap that Chinkapin nut up eventually and pack a little bit more around it till you get to the very top, and then completely cover it and then put your growth tube on. And it's just a little trick that works really good. And you know, just one of those little things, and plant a lot of them, but you can get by with that way.
All right, that's all I've got. Is there any
Okay.
other questions out there that need to be addressed? And
We
One
enjoy the
thing-
questions. Go ahead.
One thing real quick, Leslie said that she would show a picture of the spray that you were talking about to help with the
Okay, good, very good.
information.
be great.
Leslie, I think you can go ahead and do that now.
There we go. Thank you, Leslie. And it's you know, it's you know, environmentally friendly, and from the work I've been doing, I mean, this is the way to go. It's real effective on contact. It will kill the eggs, the different larval stages, and the adults as well. It works really, really good. So I'd recommend a spray routine, and if you don't, your leaves will get defoliated, some more than others, but it could set you back quite a bit on how quickly that your trees grow. Well, Ozark Chinkapins, the takeaway on this is they respond really, really well with just a little bit of extra care and attention, more than any tree I've ever seen. Thank you, Leslie. Well, I'm looking at the time right now, and if we have more questions, we'll still try to answer them on here. And we've ran over a little bit, but it's important to make sure that, Doug, these good questions that y'all got are answered. And I thank all of y'all, before everybody leaves here, for all of your time you put in to come out on a Saturday and talk about Chinkapins. And I'm just, I'm enjoying all this. I'm liking what I'm hearing, the singing, and the different uses of the tree, the research. And Hannah, if you're out here, thank you. Hopefully she can get back with great stuff. And I can't thank all of y'all enough. And so have any more questions, or is that it on the questions?
I think that's it, Steve.
Yep,
Okay,
that's all the questions on the chat. So
very good. Well, listen, I'm going to let all of you go, and thank you again for sticking around through this marathon of Zoom. And we will, I'll say this much. I talked to AJ and Leslie, and I've got a video I put on there about how to shell Ozark Chinkapins, and AJ may be putting it on Facebook, and Leslie, you may want to put it on the website. And so I told them on the very end of that, we'd be trying to actually do other little bitty things. You know, we've been telling them, but a lot of times a video where you can show people helps as well. And Leslie, I don't know if you ever found, I know your phone crashed on you, actually caught on fire, I believe, but and you lost a lot of good information. But if you can find the little video about the seed that we did, how to care for an overwinter seed, that'd be a good one. Probably people would like to see. She may have already been gone, but if we have to, we can do another video. I can make
Wait,
one on that.
I'll look for that. I think I posted it on our Facebook, so I
Oh,
can,
you did? Okay,
I
very
think
good.
so, a long time ago, so maybe it's still on there.
Okay, we can take a look and see though. And so, yeah, if there's any requests on something to help people out, you know, this whole meeting is about learning and trying to help people be more successful. And I can't say enough about Arkansas Forestry, what they've done. You know, I'm just, you can't say enough good things about it. It's just great. And, you know, this survey they sent out, it should have been done years ago. And Chris and Doug and Sean made that happen, and Doug took it over, and Doug sent out all the invitations. Boy, just a lot of work behind the scenes. It takes a lot of time to do all this, but it's for a good cause. And Doug and Chris and Sean and all the guys over at Carroll County, and Regine, you and your head of forestry, Joe Fox, I can't say enough good things about what all you are doing. So we thank you. And Tori, thank you from all of us for what you've done.
Yay, Tori.
Yay, Tori.
Yay, Tori.
Thank you, guys. I was glad to do it. I'm glad
Thank
it
you
went
for the-
smoothly.
Went really smooth.
Thank
Hey,
you.
I really appreciated the music too.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Thank you.
that's good.
Thank
Oh.
you very much. Good.
We
my
needed to
pleasure.
hear that.
Really successful. I'm most impressed the way it all came out.
Yeah, it's a man, just good stuff. And in the update I sent out to the board members, I'll just tell this, with all the stuff going on, I've had my share, like everybody else does, of family things that happen sometimes, loss of family members, and it makes you really kind of reevaluate a lot of things in your life. And so then I was talking to Kelly and I'm sorry, Donna. I was talking to Donna, and I think of y'all, Donna and Kelly, all the time. I was talking to Donna, and she said, with all this stuff going on in the world today, what a refreshing thing that we're doing and saving and restoring this tree. And that just made my day.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
But you guys have a knack of doing that. So thank you all for all your contributions and what you did and presentations. And I learned a lot today. I really learned a lot.
too.
I'm just inspired. So, but,
Yeah.
and thank you all for speaking, and hope I didn't put Al and Chris on the spot too much there, but appreciate it. Everybody have a good day, and thank you a lot.
See y'all.